There are moments when 8 seconds can change everything. 8 seconds to fall from grace. 8 seconds for absolute power to become absolute humiliation. 8 seconds for a career to end and a legend to be born. Major Derek Castellanos had exactly 8 seconds left in his military career, though he didn't know it yet. He stood in the center of Marine Corps Air Station Miramar's inspection courtyard, chest puffed with the kind of arrogance that comes from 22 years of unquestioned authority. The California morning sun caught the gold oak leaves on his collar, casting sharp shadows across weathered concrete where 200 Marines stood at rigid attention. This was his domain, his inspection, his rules. And in 8 seconds, it would all be over. But before we get to those 8 seconds that would echo through Marine Corps legend for decades to come, we need to understand how Major Castellanos found himself face to face with the one person on earth he should never have touched. Because what he grabbed wasn't just hair. What he seized in his fist was a heritage of sacrifice that stretched back 3 generations, a bloodline that had earned every ribbon, every star, every honor the Corps could bestow. He grabbed the hair of someone whose very existence was a testament to Marine Corps values he had forgotten. Someone whose identity, when revealed, would bring every Marine within 1,000 miles to attention. Someone who had been hiding in plain sight for 3 weeks, watching, waiting, documenting his every violation of the code they both swore to uphold. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? The morning had started like any other at MKS Miramar. The Pacific Marine layer hung thick and gray over the runways, muffling the sound of jets preparing for dawn training sorties. By Ordo 600, the mist had burned off, revealing a sprawling installation that housed some of the Corps' most elite aviation units. FA-18 Super Hornets sat in perfect rows on the tarmac, their engines cold but ready. Maintenance crews moved between aircraft with practiced efficiency, checking systems, loading ordnance, preparing for another day of defending American airspace. In the administrative complex near the main gate, personnel specialist Lance Corporal Sophia Chen sat at a metal desk that had seen better decades. Her workspace was a study in regulation perfection, forms aligned in precise stacks, pens arranged by color, a single coffee mug positioned exactly 3 inches from her computer monitor. Everything about her presentation screamed attention to detail, though few people bothered to notice. She was 26 years old, but carried herself with the careful neutrality of someone who had learned early that invisibility was often the safest strategy. Her uniform was pressed to Marine Corps standards, her hair pulled back in a flawless bun, her bearing straight but unremarkable. To the casual observer, she was exactly what her nameplate suggested, a junior enlisted Marine handling personnel files and administrative tasks, nothing more, nothing less, nothing worth a second glance. That assumption was about to cost Major Derek Castellanos everything he had spent 2 decades building. Chen had been assigned to MKS Miramar 3 weeks ago, transferred from what her orders claimed was 29 palms for administrative consolidation purposes. The transfer had generated minimal paperwork and 0 questions. Junior enlisted Marines moved frequently, shuffled between assignments like pieces on a chessboard. Her arrival warranted exactly the attention such transfers usually received, which was none at all. She processed morning reports with mechanical efficiency, request forms for leave, medical appointments, family housing assignments, the daily administrative machinery that kept 8,000 Marines fed, housed, and mission-ready. Her computer screen displayed case numbers and status updates in endless scrolling lists. Each click advanced another Marine's life in small, measurable increments. The work was mind-numbing by design. It required competence without creativity, attention without initiative. Perfect for someone who needed to observe without being observed, to exist in the spaces between visibility and importance. At Ordo 7:30, the phone on her desk rang. She answered with the flat professionalism that administrative personnel perfected within their first month of duty. Personnel Administration, Lance Corporal Chen speaking. Chen, this is Major Castellanos. I need you to pull service records for the entire 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marines. Full personnel files, medical histories, disciplinary actions, everything. She paused, fingers hovering over her keyboard. The request was unusual in its scope and specificity. More importantly, it was unauthorized. Major Castellanos commanded a logistics unit. He had no operational need for infantry battalion records, especially not medical and disciplinary files. "Sir, those records require special authorization from—" "I don't need authorization explanations, Lance Corporal. I need files. Can you access them or not?" The interruption carried an edge that most junior Marines would find intimidating. Chen simply noted it, mentally adding another entry to the pattern she had been building for 3 weeks. "Sir, I can access personnel summaries, but medical and disciplinary records require—" Jesus Christ! The exasperation in Castellanos' voice was theatrical, performed for effect rather than genuine frustration. "Do you know how many personnel requests I process every week? Do you know how many Marines are depending on me to keep this place running smoothly?" "No, sir. Hundreds. And when I ask for files, it's because those hundreds of Marines need me to have accurate information to do my job. Are you going to help me help them, or are you going to hide behind regulations?" The manipulation was textbook. False urgency, implied authority, emotional leverage designed to make junior personnel abandon protocols. Chen had seen variations of this approach in 12 different investigations across 8 years of active duty. "Sir, I understand the urgency. However, medical and disciplinary records are classified at a level that requires—" "Never mind." Castellanos' voice sharpened. "I'll handle this through proper channels. But Lance Corporal Chen, when proper channels take 3 weeks and Marines suffer because of bureaucratic delays, that's on you." The line went dead. Chen replaced the handset and made a note in the encrypted file she maintained on a secure drive hidden within her standard computer system. Time: 0734. Request: unauthorized access to classified personnel records. Method: intimidation and guilt manipulation. Result: request denied. Requester terminated call. Entry number 47 in 3 weeks of documentation. Major Derek Castellanos was building a case against himself, one unauthorized request at a time. He simply didn't know Chen was documenting every brick in that case with the precision of someone trained to build prosecutions that could survive any courtroom in the world. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm. Marines filed through the administrative office seeking assistance with pay issues, housing problems, family emergencies. Chen helped each one with quiet efficiency, providing solutions when possible, directing them to appropriate resources when solutions exceeded her authority. To any observer, she appeared competent but unremarkable. A good Marine doing solid work without attracting attention, the kind of personnel specialist who kept the Corps running through steady, reliable performance rather than dramatic gestures or exceptional achievements. At 1100 hours, Gunnery Sergeant Martinez entered the office carrying a clipboard thick with forms. He was a career Marine with 24 years of service, the kind of senior enlisted leader who had seen everything the Corps could offer and survived it all with his sense of humor mostly intact. "Chen," he said, approaching her desk with the casual authority that senior NCOs wielded like a natural force. "Major Castellanos wants to see you in his office, 11:15 hours." She looked up from her computer screen, expression neutral. "Did he specify the subject matter, Gunny?" "Negative. Just said to tell you to bring any files related to personnel transfers from the past month." The request was specific enough to signal intent, while remaining vague enough to avoid creating an obvious paper trail. Chen recognized the pattern. Junior personnel summoned to senior offices, asked to bring materials that might contain sensitive information, then subjected to pressure tactics designed to extract compliance. "Roger that, Gunny. I'll be there at 11:15. Martinez nodded and turned to leave, then paused. Something in his peripheral vision had caught his attention, the way Chen sat, perhaps, or the quality of stillness that surrounded her. He turned back, studying her face with the practiced eye of someone who had learned to read Marines the way others read books. "You good, Chen? You've been here 3 weeks and I don't think I've seen you smile once, not complaining, mind you, just checking." The question was asked with genuine concern rather than command authority. Martinez had a reputation for taking care of his people, for noticing when Marines were struggling before the struggle became crisis. Chen's expression softened fractionally. I'm fine, Gunny. Just focused on doing good work. Roger that. But remember, the Corps is more than just work. You got friends here, people who have your back. Don't be afraid to reach out if you need anything. Thank you, Gunny. I appreciate that. Martinez left, but the interaction lingered in Chen's mind. 3 weeks of careful observation had shown her that MCS Miramar was filled with Marines like Martinez, professionals who genuinely cared about their people, who embodied the values the Corps claimed to represent. It made Major Castellanos' behavior all the more stark by contrast. She spent the next 10 minutes gathering the requested files, selecting documents that were appropriately classified for her access level while avoiding anything that might compromise operational security. The balance was delicate. Provide enough material to satisfy the request without enabling potential misconduct. At 11:14 hours, she knocked on the door to Major Castellanos' office. Enter. The space was larger than most offices allocated to field-grade officers, with windows overlooking the main runway and walls decorated with photographs from various deployments. Castellanos sat behind a desk that seemed designed more for intimidation than functionality. Oversized, positioned to force visitors to look up at him, clear of personal items except for a single nameplate and a glass displaying campaign ribbons. He did not look up immediately when she entered, a calculated display of busy importance designed to reinforce the hierarchy between them. Chen stood at attention 3 feet from his desk, holding the file folder with both hands, waiting for acknowledgement that she knew might be deliberately delayed. After 30 seconds, Castellanos raised his eyes from whatever document had been consuming his attention. His gaze moved over her slowly, taking in details that had nothing to do with professional assessment. Lance Corporal Chen, have a seat. The invitation was delivered as an order. Chen remained standing. Sir, I prefer to stand. I said sit down, Marine. The escalation was immediate and unnecessary. Chen recognized it as a test of compliance, an attempt to establish dominance through minor violations of courtesy. She had encountered this behavior pattern 46 times. In the past 3 weeks, she sat. Good. Castellanos leaned back in his chair, a gesture that somehow managed to be both casual and controlling. Now, about those files I requested this morning. I understand you had some concerns about authorization. Yes, sir. Medical and disciplinary records require special clearance that... Stop. He held up one hand, palm facing her. I don't need a lecture on regulations. What I need is cooperation from Marines who understand that sometimes the mission requires flexibility. Chen remained silent, waiting for the actual request that she knew would follow this preamble. Here's what's going to happen, Castellanos continued. You're going to go back to your desk and pull those files I requested. All of them. You're going to do it quietly, efficiently, and without bothering anyone else with questions about authorization. Sir, I cannot access those files without... You cannot, or you will not. The question hung in the air like a weapon waiting to be deployed. Chen understood that her answer would determine the direction of everything that followed. I cannot, sir. The system requires authorization codes that exceed my access level. Castellanos studied her face for a long moment, searching for signs of deception or defiance. What he found instead was absolute calm. No nervousness, no fear, no indication that his authority was having its intended effect. Lance Corporal Chen, how long have you been in the Marine Corps? 4 years, sir. 4 years? And in those 4 years, have you learned anything about the importance of following orders? Yes, sir. Have you learned anything about the chain of command? Yes, sir. Then you understand that when a major gives you an order, your job is to execute that order, not to question it, not to cite regulations, not to create obstacles. Your job is to say, yes, sir, and make it happen. Chen's breathing remained steady. 4 counts in, 4 counts held, 4 counts out, 4 counts empty. The pattern had become automatic over years of training, a physiological anchor that kept her centered when external pressures sought to destabilize. Sir, I understand the chain of command. I also understand that lawful orders must be executed within the framework of established regulations. The response was perfectly correct, textbook appropriate for any military lawyer reviewing the conversation. It was also guaranteed to escalate Castellanos' frustration. Lawful orders. He repeated the phrase with contempt. Let me tell you something about lawful orders, Lance Corporal. In the real Marine Corps, the one that exists outside of training manuals and classroom lectures, lawful orders are the ones that accomplish the mission. Everything else is bureaucratic noise. Chen said nothing. Sometimes silence was the most effective response to attempts at manipulation. Castellanos stood and walked around his desk, positioning himself closer to her chair. The movement was designed to create physical intimidation through proximity, another technique from the textbook of abusive authority. You know what I think? He leaned against the edge of his desk, arms crossed. I think you're one of those Marines who thinks regulations are more important than results. I think you're more concerned with covering your own ass than supporting your unit. Still, Chen remained silent. Am I wrong? Sir, I am concerned with executing my duties in accordance with established procedures. That's not what I asked. Castellanos' voice sharpened. I asked if you're more concerned with regulations than results. The question was designed to create a trap. Any direct answer would either confirm his accusation or force her into an argument about the relative importance of rules versus outcomes. Chen recognized the tactic and declined to engage. Sir, I believe regulations exist to ensure that results are achieved through appropriate means. Castellanos stared at her for 10 seconds, his expression cycling through frustration, calculation, and something that might have been respect if it came from someone capable of recognizing competence in subordinates. Fine, he said finally. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to figure out a way to get me those files. I don't care how you do it. Talk to someone who has higher access, submit a special request, find a workaround in the system, but you're going to get me those files by close of business today. Sir, if you can provide written authorization for the request, I can submit it through proper channels. I'm not putting anything in writing until I know what's in those files. The statement revealed more than Castellanos probably intended. He wanted unauthorized access to sensitive information without creating a paper trail that could be traced back to him. Classic behavior for someone operating outside established protocols. Chen nodded slowly. Sir, I understand your position. However, without written authorization, I cannot proceed with accessing classified personnel records. Castellanos pushed himself off the desk and took a step closer to her chair. His physical presence was now actively intimidating, close enough that she could smell coffee and cologne, close enough that standing up would require her to step around him. Lance Corporal, I'm going to ask you one more time. Are you going to help me get those files, or are you going to continue hiding behind regulations? 4 counts in, 4 counts held, 4 counts out, 4 counts empty. Sir, I am prepared to assist with any request that can be processed through appropriate channels. Appropriate channels. Castellanos shook his head. You know what your problem is, Chen. You don't understand how things really work around here. You think the Marine Corps runs on paperwork and procedures, but it actually runs on relationships, on trust, on Marines helping Marines get things done. He moved closer still, now standing, directly in front of her chair. And right now, you're telling me that you don't trust me enough to help me do my job. You're telling me that paperwork is more important than supporting a senior officer. Do I have that right? The manipulation was becoming more aggressive, designed to make her feel guilty for following protocols, disloyal for refusing unauthorized requests. Chen had seen this progression dozens of times in her career, always following the same pattern of escalating pressure. Sir, I trust you to operate within the framework of established regulations, as I'm sure you trust me to do the same. The response was diplomatic enough to avoid direct confrontation while firm enough to maintain her position. Castellanos' expression darkened. Get out, he said quietly. Go back to your desk. Think about what we discussed. Think about whether you want to be the kind of Marine who supports her leadership or the kind who creates obstacles. Chen stood, file folder still in hand. Sir, did you want to review the transfer files I brought? No, I want you to think about our conversation. We'll continue this discussion later. She came to attention. Aye, sir? Dismissed. Chen exited the office, closing the door behind her with precise control. As she walked back to her desk, her Her mind was already processing the interaction, categorizing threats, documenting violations, preparing for the escalation she knew would follow. Because Major Derek Castellanos had just made a critical mistake. He had shown his hand, demonstrated that he wanted unauthorized access to classified information and was willing to use intimidation to obtain it. More importantly, he had revealed that he saw Lance Corporal Sophia Chen as an obstacle to be overcome rather than a Marine to be respected. Tomorrow morning at 800 hours, the quarterly personnel inspection would take place in the main courtyard. 200 Marines would stand at attention while senior officers reviewed uniforms, bearing, and adherence to standards. Major Castellanos would be conducting that inspection, and Lance Corporal Chen would be standing in formation, waiting to see exactly how far he was willing to escalate when public humiliation became available as a tool of intimidation. She had no idea that in less than 24 hours, those 8 seconds would change everything. But she was ready for whatever came next, because some secrets are worth keeping until the moment they become weapons. And some people need to learn the hard way that not every Lance Corporal is who they appear to be. The California sun rose over MCAS Miramar with the kind of aggressive clarity that makes shadows look like they were cut from black paper. By 11:30, the temperature had already climbed into the mid-70s, promising another scorching day that would test the limits of dress blue uniforms and military bearing. In the main courtyard, a space designed for ceremonial formations and large-scale inspections, 200 Marines stood in perfect ranks, dress blue uniforms pressed to regulation standards, white gloves spotless, covers positioned at precisely the correct angle. The formation stretched across polished concrete that reflected the morning light like a mirror, creating an optical illusion that made the Marines appear to float above their own shadows. This was the quarterly personnel inspection, a tradition that combined military pageantry with practical assessment of standards and discipline. Every Marine from Lance Corporal to Colonel would be individually examined by senior officers, their uniforms scrutinized for defects, their bearing evaluated for military correctness, their adherence to regulations measured against core standards. For most Marines, the inspection was a routine exercise in looking sharp and standing still. For Major Derek Castellanos, walking slowly down the first rank with a clipboard in hand and authority radiating from every gesture, it was an opportunity to demonstrate power. For Lance Corporal Sophia Chen, standing at attention in the third rank, 15th position from the left, it was the culmination of 3 weeks of careful documentation and patient waiting. The morning had begun with Chen arriving at the formation area at 0645, 30 minutes before the required assembly time. She had used those minutes to position herself strategically, close enough to the reviewing stand that any interaction with senior officers would be visible to the entire formation, far enough from the edges that she couldn't be easily isolated or removed from view. Her dress blue uniform was regulation perfect, but with subtle differences that only expert eyes might notice. The ribbons above her left breast pocket were arranged in the standard configuration required for her apparent rank, but if someone looked closely, if someone knew what to look for, they might notice that the spacing was exactly 2 millimeters tighter than regulation specified. 2 millimeters. The difference between standard military precision and the kind of exactness that suggested training beyond what any Lance Corporal should possess. Her white gloves showed no trace of lint or smudging. Her brass buckle and buttons had been polished until they could serve as mirrors. Every visible element of her uniform met or exceeded Marine Corps standards, creating an appearance of competence that bordered on perfection. But it was the invisible elements that mattered most. The encrypted recording device sewn into her dress blue blouse, positioned to capture audio and video through a lens no larger than a pinhead. The emergency communication beacon embedded in her belt buckle, designed to summon immediate assistance if the situation escalated beyond manageable parameters. The small but sophisticated tracking device hidden in the heel of her dress shoe, broadcasting her location to monitoring stations positioned around the base. Lance Corporal Sophia Chen was equipped like someone preparing for combat, not a routine inspection. Because sometimes the most dangerous battles happen in broad daylight, in front of hundreds of witnesses, conducted by people who believe their authority makes them untouchable. At 0800 precisely, the commanding officer of MCAS Miramar took his position at the reviewing stand. Colonel Harrison was a career aviator with 28 years of service and a reputation for running a tight command. He surveyed the formation with the practiced eye of someone who had conducted hundreds of similar inspections, looking for anything that deviated from standard. Behind him, the inspection team assembled. Major Castellanos stood at the colonel's right shoulder, clipboard ready, expression set in the kind of serious concentration that suggested he took this responsibility seriously. 3 other field-grade officers flanked him, each assigned to specific portions of the formation. Gunnery Sergeant Martinez positioned himself near the formation's center, ready to relay commands and ensure proper military courtesy throughout the process. His presence was reassuring to the junior Marines, a senior enlisted leader who could be trusted to maintain standards while protecting his people from any abuse of authority. "Gentlemen," Colonel Harrison's voice carried across the formation with command authority that required no amplification. "Begin inspection." The process started at the formation's right flank, with each officer assigned to a specific group of Marines. Major Castellanos headed directly toward the center ranks, toward the section where Lance Corporal Chen waited with the patience of someone who had spent months preparing for this exact moment. She could see him approaching through her peripheral vision, moving down the line with theatrical precision. He stopped in front of each Marine, examined their uniform from multiple angles, checked their bearing and military courtesy. Most interactions lasted 30 to 40 seconds, enough time to identify obvious defects without creating unnecessary delay. But Chen noticed that Castellanos was spending longer with female Marines. His examinations of their uniforms were more thorough, his questions more personal, his overall demeanor suggesting he viewed the inspection as an opportunity for something beyond professional assessment. 2 positions to her left, he stopped in front of Lance Corporal Rodriguez, a motor transport operator with 18 months of exemplary service. Chen could hear every word of their interaction. "Lance Corporal Rodriguez, when did you last have this uniform cleaned?" "Sir, it was cleaned Monday evening and pressed Tuesday morning." "Tuesday morning, and you're satisfied with the results?" "Sir, yes, sir." Castellanos circled around Rodriguez slowly, examining her uniform from angles that served no legitimate inspection purpose. "Your hair is within regulations, but barely. In the future, I recommend you err on the side of more conservative styling." "Sir, yes, sir." "Your bearing is acceptable, but I'm detecting some tension in your shoulders. Are you nervous, Lance Corporal?" The question was designed to create the very nervousness it claimed to observe. Chen could see Rodriguez's jaw tighten slightly as she processed the implications. "Sir, no, sir." "Good, because Marines who can't handle pressure during inspection tend to struggle under real stress. Remember that." Castellanos moved on, leaving Rodriguez standing at attention, but clearly shaken by the interaction. The exchange had been technically appropriate, no violations of regulation, no obvious misconduct. But it had been crafted to undermine confidence and establish psychological dominance through subtle intimidation. Classic pattern. Chen made a mental note as Castellanos approached the Marine between her and Rodriguez. Lance Corporal Williams, a maintenance specialist with 3 years of solid performance, received similar treatment. Lengthy examination of uniform details that were clearly within standards, questions designed to provoke anxiety, comments that suggested dissatisfaction without specific criticism. "Your ribbon rack is properly aligned," Castellanos told Williams after spending 90 seconds examining an arrangement that was obviously correct. "But the spacing could be more precise. Attention to detail in uniform maintenance reflects attention to detail in job performance." "Sir, yes, sir. In the future, I recommend using a ruler to ensure exact measurements between ribbons. The Marine Corps expects precision, not approximation." Another technically correct but practically abusive interaction. Castellanos was establishing a pattern of impossible standards applied selectively to create the impression of professional thoroughness while actually engaging in targeted harassment. Then he was in front of Chen. "Lance Corporal Chen." She stared straight ahead, focusing on a point exactly 6 inches above and behind his left shoulder. Standard military courtesy during inspection. Acknowledge the inspector's presence without making direct eye contact, unless specifically directed. Sir, Castellanos began his examination at her feet, checking the shine on her dress shoes, the alignment of her trouser cuffs, the precision of her gig line. Everything was perfect, regulation exact, impossible to criticize through legitimate standards. But Chen could sense his frustration mounting as he found nothing to attack. His movement around her became more aggressive, his examination more invasive. He was looking for any excuse to escalate, any minor deviation that could justify public humiliation. Your uniform appears to meet basic standards, he said finally, his tone suggesting that basic standards were somehow inadequate. Sir, thank you, sir. However, I notice your bearing suggests a certain arrogance. Do you consider yourself superior to other Marines in this formation? The question was a trap. Any answer could be twisted into evidence of inappropriate attitude. Chen recognized the technique and chose the safest possible response. Sir, no, sir. No? Then why do you stand like someone who thinks they're better than everyone else? Gunnery Sergeant Martinez was watching now, his expression showing concern. The interaction was moving beyond normal inspection parameters into something that felt personal and inappropriate. Sir, I'm attempting to maintain proper military bearing as instructed. Proper military bearing doesn't include looking like you're bored by the entire process. Chen's breathing remained steady. 4 counts in, 4 counts held, 4 counts out, 4 counts empty. The pattern that had carried her through interrogations, through combat stress, through situations where showing weakness would have meant death. Sir, I apologize if my bearing appears inappropriate. I am focused on executing proper military courtesy. Castellanos stepped closer, now standing directly in front of her at a distance that violated personal space while remaining technically within inspection parameters. She could smell coffee on his breath, see the small veins in his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept well. Lance Corporal Chen, yesterday you refused a direct order from me. Do you remember that conversation? The question was inappropriate for public inspection, designed to embarrass her in front of the formation while creating the impression that she had been insubordinate. Several Marines within earshot were now listening, their attention drawn by the obvious tension in Castellanos' voice. Sir, I remember our conversation about file access procedures. File access procedures, is that what you call refusing to follow orders? Gunnery Sergeant Martinez took a step forward. The movement was subtle but unmistakable, a senior enlisted leader positioning himself to intervene if necessary. Major, Martinez said quietly, is there a specific uniform deficiency that requires extended discussion? Castellanos turned toward Martinez with the kind of expression that suggested interruption was unwelcome. Gunny, I'm conducting an inspection of Marine Corps standards. That includes adherence to the chain of command. Roger that, sir. Just wanted to ensure we stay on timeline for the colonel's review. The reminder was diplomatically phrased but firm in its intent. Martinez was telling Castellanos to move along without directly challenging his authority. A masterclass in senior enlisted leadership, protecting subordinates while maintaining proper military courtesy. Castellanos turned back to Chen, his jaw tight with frustration. The interaction was being observed now, witnessed by NCOs who understood what appropriate inspection behavior looked like. He needed to find a reason to escalate quickly or move on. That's when he saw it. A single hair had escaped from Chen's bun, freed by the California breeze that had picked up over the past few minutes. It was perhaps 2 inches long, barely visible except from certain angles, the kind of minor imperfection that typically warranted a quiet suggestion to fix rather than public correction. But Castellanos' face lit up like he had discovered contraband. Lance Corporal Chen, your hair is out of regulation. Chen's peripheral vision could see the escaped hair, but moving to fix it without permission would be inappropriate during formal inspection. Sir, request permission to adjust. Permission denied. You should have ensured your appearance was correct before formation. The criticism was technically valid, but disproportionate to the offense. A single loose hair during an outdoor inspection was hardly evidence of poor preparation or military bearing. Sir, yes, sir. In fact, Castellanos continued, his voice rising enough to carry to nearby Marines. This kind of attention to detail failure suggests broader problems with your attitude toward Marine Corps standards. He was building toward something now, working himself up to a level of righteous indignation that would justify whatever came next. Chen could sense the escalation coming, but remained motionless, waiting to see how far he would go. You know what I think, Lance Corporal? I think you need a lesson in what right looks like. And that's when Major Derek Castellanos made the decision that would end his career. He reached out and grabbed Chen's hair, not the escaped strand, her entire bun. His fist closed around the base of her hair arrangement and yanked backward, pulling her head at an angle that forced her to look up at him while causing immediate pain. This is what happens when Marines don't take pride in their appearance, he said loudly, his grip tightening as he shook her head slightly for emphasis. The formation went silent. 200 Marines stopped breathing simultaneously. Even the distant sound of aircraft engines seemed to fade as every witness processed what they had just seen. A major had just grabbed a lance corporal's hair during a formal inspection in full view of the entire formation, with the commanding officer less than 50 yards away. Gunnery Sergeant Martinez stepped forward instantly. "Sir, release her immediately." But Castellanos was beyond rational thought now, committed to his course of action and determined to follow through. He maintained his grip on Chen's hair, using it to control her position while he addressed the formation. "Marines," he called out, his voice carrying across the courtyard, "this is what happens when you fail to meet Marine Corps standards." Chen remained perfectly still, despite the pain shooting through her scalp. Her breathing never changed pattern. Her hands stayed at her sides. Her expression remained neutral, even as her head was forced into an unnatural angle. She was waiting for the right moment, waiting for exactly the right conditions to reveal who she actually was. Because Major Derek Castellanos had just committed assault in front of 200 witnesses, recorded by hidden cameras, broadcast to monitoring stations positioned around the base, and he had exactly 8 seconds before his world exploded. 8 seconds, 7 seconds. Colonel Harrison was moving toward them now, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and command authority. But he was 40 yards away, moving through ranks of Marines who had turned to watch the spectacle unfolding in their formation. 6 seconds. Gunnery Sergeant Martinez was closing the distance faster, his voice carrying the kind of command presence that came from 2 decades of protecting Marines from abuse. "Major Castellanos, release Lance Corporal Chen immediately. That is unlawful contact." 5 seconds. The hidden recording device in Chen's uniform was capturing everything. The angle of her head, the grip on her hair, the shocked faces of Marines who had never seen anything like this during an inspection. Audio and video evidence that would be admissible in any court-martial proceeding. 4 seconds. Castellanos was still talking, still using Chen's hair as a prop for his lecture on military standards, oblivious to the fact that he had just destroyed his career in the most public way possible. 3 seconds. Chen made her decision. 2 seconds. She spoke, her voice carrying clearly across the formation despite her awkward position, calm and controlled despite the pain radiating through her scalp. 1 second. "Major Castellanos, you are in violation of Article 128 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. You are currently committing assault on a superior officer." 0. The words landed like artillery rounds. Every Marine within hearing distance froze. Gunnery Sergeant Martinez stopped mid-stride. Colonel Harrison's expression shifted from anger to confusion to something approaching shock. "Superior officer?" Castellanos' grip loosened slightly as his brain processed what he had just heard. "What did you say?" Chen's voice remained level, professional, carrying the kind of authority that came not from rank displayed, but rank earned. "I said you are committing assault on a superior officer, Major. I strongly advise you to release me immediately." "Superior officer? You're a lance corporal. I can see your rank on your—" "You can see my cover rank, Major, not my actual rank." The formation was so quiet now that the sound of distant aircraft engines seemed deafening by comparison. 200 Marines stood frozen in place, watching something they didn't understand but knew was significant beyond anything they had previously witnessed. Castellanos looked down at Chen's uniform, searching for some indication of what she meant. The ribbons above her left breast pocket appeared standard for a 4-year enlisted Marine. Her sleeves showed Lance Corporal chevrons. Her collar displayed no officer insignia. But there was something about her bearing now, something in the way she held herself. Despite his grip on her hair, that suggested depths he hadn't perceived. "What are you talking about?" His voice had lost its command authority, replaced by uncertainty and growing fear. Chen turned her eyes toward his face for the first time during the entire inspection. When she spoke, her tone carried the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years learning to command in the most difficult circumstances imaginable. "Major Derek Castellanos, United States Marine Corps, you are hereby notified that you have committed assault upon Lieutenant Colonel Sophia Chen, United States Marine Corps, currently assigned to the Inspector General's Office, Marine Corps Combat Development Command, operating under deep cover pursuant to investigation of unauthorized requests for classified information and abuse of subordinate personnel." The world stopped. Literally stopped. 200 Marines went completely motionless. Gunnery Sergeant Martinez's mouth fell open. Colonel Harrison, still 30 yards away, halted in mid-stride like he had walked into an invisible wall. Lieutenant Colonel, not Lance Corporal, Lieutenant Colonel, 0T5, Field Grade Officer, senior to Major Castellanos by 1 full rank grade, Superior Officer. Castellanos' hand opened reflexively, releasing Chen's hair as if it had suddenly become electrically charged. He stepped backward, his face cycling through emotions too rapidly to track: confusion, disbelief, horror, recognition, terror. "That's impossible," he whispered. "You can't be. You're 26 years old. You can't make Lieutenant Colonel at 26. That doesn't happen." Chen straightened slowly, adjusting her hair with precise movements while maintaining eye contact with the man who had just ended his career. When she spoke, her voice carried across the formation with crystal clarity. "I was promoted to 0 to 5 16 months ago under special authority granted by the Commandant of the Marine Corps for exceptional performance during classified operations in the Middle East. My promotion was kept confidential due to the nature of my current assignment with the Inspector General's office." She gestured slightly toward the formation around them. "This entire base has been under investigation for 3 weeks, Major. Your requests for unauthorized access to classified personnel files have been documented 47 times. Your pattern of harassment toward female Marines has been observed and recorded on multiple occasions. Your abuse of authority during administrative interactions has been cataloged in detail." Castellanos was shaking his head like he could deny reality through sheer force of will. No, this isn't real. This is some kind of setup." Today's interaction was the final element required to complete the investigation. Assault on a superior officer in front of 200 witnesses, all of whom can testify to what they observed. Chen reached into her dress blue blouse and withdrew a small device no larger than a smartphone. She activated it with her thumb, and suddenly every Marine in the formation could hear her voice played back from the recording. "Major Castellanos, you are in violation of Article 128 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice." The playback continued for 10 seconds, crystal clear audio and video documentation of everything that had just occurred. When it ended, Chen replaced the device and looked directly at Castellanos. "This recording, along with 3 weeks of similar documentation, will be presented to a court-martial board convened within the next 72 hours. Colonel Harrison had finally reached them, his face showing the kind of command presence that came from dealing with crises that threatened to destroy everything he had worked to build. "What the hell's going on here?" His voice cut through the silence like a blade. Chen came to attention. "Sir, Lieutenant Colonel Sophia Chen, Inspector General's Office, reporting completion of investigation Alpha 779er. Subject has been observed committing assault on a superior officer in violation of Article 128 UCMJ, in addition to multiple violations of Articles 92, 133, and 134 documented over the course of a 3-week investigation period." Harrison stared at her, processing the implications of what he was hearing. "Lieutenant Colonel, you've been operating undercover on my base for 3 weeks?" "Sir, yes, sir. By authority of the Inspector General and with notification to Headquarters Marine Corps, your command was briefed on general investigation parameters but not specific operational details. And Major Castellanos just committed assault on a superior officer in front of 200 witnesses while under surveillance for multiple violations of regulations regarding classified information access and abuse of subordinate personnel. Harrison turned toward Castellanos, who was standing motionless, his face ashen, looking like a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. Major, is what Lieutenant Colonel Chen said accurate? Did you grab her hair during this inspection? Castellanos opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. No sound emerged. Major, I asked you a direct question. Sir, her hair was out of regulation, and I was demonstrating proper standards. By grabbing another Marine's hair? Sir, I didn't know I thought she was just a lance corporal who was being insubordinate. So you thought assaulting a lance corporal was appropriate behavior? The question hung in the air like poison gas, because there was no good answer. Either Castellanos believed assault was acceptable when committed against junior personnel, or he was trying to claim ignorance of basic military courtesy. Either way, his career was over. Sir, no sir, I made an error in judgment. An error in judgment. Harrison repeated the phrase with the kind of cold precision that preceded volcanic eruptions. Major, you committed assault. During a formal inspection in front of 200 Marines, that's not an error in judgment, that's criminal conduct. Chen remained at attention while the exchange continued around her. This was no longer her operation. It had transitioned to command authority dealing with a crisis that threatened the integrity of the entire installation. But she couldn't help feeling a certain satisfaction as she watched Castellanos realize that 8 seconds of uncontrolled ego had destroyed 22 years of military service. 8 seconds to fall from grace, 8 seconds for absolute power to become absolute humiliation, 8 seconds for a career to end and a legend to be born. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one. Harrison stepped closer to Castellanos, his voice dropping to something that somehow managed to be both quiet and terrifying. Major, you will return to your quarters immediately. You will not speak to anyone about this incident. You will not attempt to contact Lieutenant Colonel Chen. You will not leave the base. Military police will be contacting you within the hour to begin formal proceedings. Sir, if I could just explain. There is nothing to explain. You grabbed another Marine's hair during a formal inspection. 200 people watched you do it. It was recorded by surveillance equipment. The explanation is simple. You committed a crime. Castellanos looked around the formation, searching for some sign of support, some indication that someone understood his perspective. What he found instead were 200 Marines, staring at him with expressions ranging from shock to disgust to professional disappointment. These were his peers, his subordinates, his colleagues, people he had worked with for months or years, and every single one of them had just watched him destroy himself through an act of casual violence that revealed everything they needed to know about his character. Sir, request permission to return to quarters. Granted. Get out of my sight. Castellanos walked away across the formation, alone, his career ending with each step. He would face court-martial within the week. He would be convicted based on testimony from 200 witnesses and surveillance footage that captured every second of his assault. He would be dismissed from the Marine Corps in disgrace, his 22 years of service reduced to a cautionary tale about the consequences of unchecked authority. All because he had grabbed the hair of someone whose true identity he had been too arrogant to investigate. When Castellanos was gone, Harrison turned back to Chen. His expression had shifted from command authority to something approaching respect. Lieutenant Colonel, I need to understand the scope of this investigation. How extensive is the misconduct we're dealing with? Chen relaxed, slightly from her rigid attention position. Sir, Major Castellanos was the primary target, but the investigation identified systemic issues with oversight of personnel with access to classified materials. I'll be submitting a comprehensive report with recommendations for procedural improvements. How bad is it? Sir, Major Castellanos made 47 unauthorized requests for classified information over the course of 3 weeks. Each request was denied, but the pattern suggests either inadequate training on proper procedures or deliberate attempts to circumvent security protocols. Harrison's face darkened. 47 requests in 3 weeks. Yes, sir. Additionally, his pattern of harassment toward female personnel had been ongoing for approximately 6 months, based on my interviews with affected Marines. 6 months. Harrison looked out over the formation, still standing at attention, still processing what they had witnessed. How many Marines were affected? 14 documented cases of inappropriate conduct during administrative interactions, 7 cases of public humiliation during inspections or official functions, 3 cases of attempted coercion to violate security protocols. The numbers were damning. Castellanos hadn't just been a problem officer, he had been a systematic threat to unit cohesion and operational security. Lieutenant Colonel Chen, I need you to know that if I had been aware of this pattern, I would have taken action immediately. Sir, I understand. The investigation was designed to identify not just individual misconduct, but systemic failures in reporting and oversight. My report will include recommendations to prevent similar situations in the future. Harrison nodded slowly, then turned to address the formation. Marines, his voice carried across the courtyard with absolute authority. What you witnessed here today was the conclusion of a legitimate investigation into serious misconduct. Lieutenant Colonel Chen was performing her duties as an officer in the Inspector General's Corps, operating under lawful authority. He paused, letting that information settle. The lesson here is simple. The Marine Corps maintains its standards through constant vigilance. When Marines fail to live up to those standards, especially when those Marines are in positions of authority, there are consequences. Another pause. More importantly, every Marine in this formation, regardless of rank, has the right to be treated with dignity and respect. What Major Castellanos did was not discipline, it was not instruction, it was assault, pure and simple. The silence continued, heavy with implications that would reshape how every Marine present thought about authority, accountability, and the importance of speaking up when they witnessed misconduct. Gunnery Sergeant Martinez, dismiss the formation. Normal duty day continues. Lieutenant Colonel Chen, please report to my office at your earliest convenience. Sir, yes, sir. As the formation began to disperse, Chen found herself surrounded by Marines who wanted to understand what had just happened. But it was Martinez who approached first, his expression mixing professional respect with personal concern. Ma'am, he said quietly, are you all right? That was something I never expected to see in 24 years. Chen touched her hair briefly, checking for damage from Castellanos' grip. I'm fine, Gunny. Thank you for stepping in when you did. Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, how long have you been a lieutenant colonel? 16 months. Martinez shook his head slowly. 16 months, and you've been here 3 weeks pretending to be a lance corporal, watching Castellanos dig his own grave. That's an accurate assessment, Gunny. Ma'am, that took a special kind of courage. What he did to you, that wasn't easy to endure. Chen looked out across the formation area, where Marines were slowly returning to their daily routines. But she knew that what had happened here would be discussed for years to come, would become part of the institutional memory of MKS Miramar. Gunny, sometimes the job requires you to take hits so that other people don't have to. 14 female Marines were being harassed by Major Castellanos. If enduring 3 weeks of his behavior prevented him from harming any more Marines, then it was worth it. Martinez nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am, it was, but that doesn't make it easy. No, Chen agreed. It doesn't make it easy. As she walked toward the administrative complex to prepare for her meeting with Colonel Harrison, Chen reflected on the weight of what had just concluded. 3 weeks of careful investigation, documented evidence, patient endurance of abuse and intimidation, all leading to 8 seconds that would change everything. 8 seconds when Major Derek Castellanos revealed who he truly was. 8 seconds when Lieutenant Colonel Sophia Chen revealed who she truly was. 8 seconds that proved the Marine Corps' commitment to protecting its people from those who would abuse the authority they had been trusted to wield responsibly. Justice wasn't always swift, but when it arrived, it was absolute. The silence in Colonel Harrison's office was different from the silence that had fallen over the formation. This was the quiet of institutional machinery beginning to turn, of consequences assembling themselves into formal proceedings that would reshape careers and redefine standards. Harrison sat behind his desk, reading through the preliminary report that Chen had transmitted from her secure device. The document was comprehensive: 47 unauthorized requests for classified information, documented patterns of harassment, detailed behavioral analysis spanning 3 weeks of intensive observation. "Lieutenant Colonel," Harrison said finally, looking up from the screen, "this is damning. Not just for Castellanos, but for our entire oversight structure." Chen sat across from him, her dress blue uniform still perfect despite the morning's events. The only visible sign of what she had endured was a slight redness around her hairline where Castellanos had grabbed her, evidence that would fade within hours, but existed permanently in high-definition video surveillance. "Sir, the investigation was designed to identify systemic weaknesses as well as individual misconduct. Major Castellanos was symptomatic of larger problems with security protocols and personnel oversight." "Walk me through the security violations. How serious are we talking?" Chen activated her tablet, displaying a network diagram that showed the scope of Castellanos' attempts to access classified information. "Sir, over 3 weeks, Major Castellanos requested unauthorized access to personnel files for 342 individual Marines, medical records for 127 personnel, disciplinary actions for 89 Marines, and operational summaries for 7 classified missions." Harrison's face darkened progressively as she continued. "Each request was denied, but the pattern suggests either complete ignorance of security protocols or deliberate attempts to circumvent established procedures. More concerning, sir, is that he used his authority to intimidate junior personnel into attempting to fulfill these requests." "Intimidate how?" "Implied threats to career advancement, suggestions that refusing his requests demonstrated disloyalty to the unit, classic manipulation tactics designed to make junior Marines feel guilty for following established security procedures." Harrison leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. "How many Marines were pressured?" 14 documented cases where Major Castellanos attempted to coerce personnel into violating security protocols. 3 cases where junior Marines actually submitted unauthorized access requests before being stopped by system safeguards. "Jesus Christ," Harrison ran a hand through his hair. He was systematically undermining security protocols across the entire installation. "Yes, sir. Additionally, the harassment of female personnel served a secondary purpose beyond personal gratification. By targeting women in administrative positions, he was attempting to create a climate of intimidation that would make them more compliant with inappropriate requests." The analysis was clinical, but the implications were staggering. Castellanos hadn't just been a problem officer. He had been operating a systematic campaign of intimidation designed to compromise operational security. "Lieutenant Colonel, I need to ask, how bad could this have gotten if we hadn't caught him?" Chen considered the question carefully. "Sir, based on his escalating pattern of behavior and increasing desperation to access classified information, I estimate he would have achieved unauthorized access to sensitive materials within 6 to 8 weeks. Once that threshold was crossed, the potential for catastrophic security breach becomes exponentially higher." "Catastrophic how?" "Personnel records contain operational assignments, security clearance levels, and personal vulnerabilities that hostile intelligence services could exploit. Medical records reveal psychological profiles and physical limitations that could be used for targeting or coercion. Disciplinary records expose Marines vulnerable to compromise through blackmail or financial pressure." Harrison was quiet for a long moment, staring at the network diagram showing the scope of what Castellanos had attempted to access. "Lieutenant Colonel, I want you to know that what you did here Enduring 3 weeks of harassment and abuse to build this case, that took a kind of courage most officers will never be asked to demonstrate. Sir, I was doing my job. No, you were doing considerably more than your job. You put yourself at personal risk to protect the integrity of this installation and the safety of Marines under my command. That goes beyond duty. Chen maintained her professional composure, but something in her expression suggested the recognition meant more than she was willing to admit. 3 weeks of being treated as a subordinate, of enduring intimidation and verbal abuse, of watching criminal behavior while being unable to intervene directly, the psychological toll had been significant. Sir, there is one more element we need to address immediately. Harrison leaned forward. Go ahead. Major Castellanos' behavior this morning suggests possible psychological instability. His willingness to commit assault in front of 200 witnesses indicates either complete loss of impulse control or fundamental disconnection from reality. Either way, he represents a potential threat to personnel safety. You think he might retaliate? Sir, I think he might do anything. His career is over, his reputation is destroyed, and he's facing criminal prosecution. People in that situation sometimes make desperate choices. Harrison reached for his phone. I'll have military police maintain surveillance. What else do you recommend? Immediate revocation of all base access, confiscation of government property including weapons and vehicles, and psychological evaluation before any interaction with base personnel. Done. Harrison began making notes. What about the court-martial proceedings? Chen opened another file on her tablet. Sir, the evidence package is comprehensive. Video surveillance of this morning's assault, audio recordings of harassment incidents, documented patterns of security violations, witness testimony from affected personnel. The conviction rate for cases with this level of evidence is approximately 98%. And your testimony? I'll testify to everything I observed and documented during the investigation. However, sir, the strength of the case doesn't depend on my testimony alone. The video evidence speaks for itself. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Harrison called for entry, and his aide opened the door to admit 3 men in dress blue uniforms with ribbons stacked across their chests like colorful armor. Sir, the aide announced, Brigadier General Morrison, Colonel Hendricks, and Lieutenant Colonel Stevens from Marine Corps Combat Development Command. Harrison stood immediately, Chen following his lead. The visitors were clearly senior leadership responding to reports of the incident, arriving with the kind of speed that suggested this investigation had implications beyond MCAS Miramar. Brigadier General Morrison entered first, a compact man in his early 50s with gray at his temples and the bearing of someone who had spent decades in command positions. His eyes found Chen immediately, studying her with the analytical gaze of someone accustomed to evaluating personnel under difficult circumstances. Colonel Harrison, Lieutenant Colonel Chen, thank you for accommodating this visit on short notice. Sir, not a problem, Harrison replied. I assume you're here about this morning's incident. Among other things. Morrison turned to Chen. Lieutenant Colonel, I've reviewed your preliminary report. Impressive work. The kind of investigation that prevents catastrophic security breaches. Thank you, sir. However, I'm concerned about the personal cost. 3 weeks of systematic harassment culminating in physical assault. That's beyond what we typically ask of officers in the Inspector General Corps. Chen's response was immediate and firm. Sir, the mission required deep cover infiltration to document patterns of behavior that would have been concealed if the subject knew he was under investigation. The personal cost was acceptable, given the scope of potential security compromise. Morrison nodded slowly. That's the answer I expected, but not necessarily the answer I wanted to hear. Taking that kind of abuse for the mission shows exceptional dedication, but it also shows we're asking too much of our people. Colonel Hendricks, who had been quiet until now, stepped forward. Lieutenant Colonel Chen, the video footage from this morning's incident has been reviewed by Marine Corps headquarters. What Major Castellanos did was criminal assault captured in high definition. But your response, maintaining composure, documenting everything, using the incident to complete your investigation, that was masterful. Sir, I was trained to handle confrontational situations while maintaining operational security. This went beyond confrontational, Lieutenant Colonel Stevens added. This was degrading treatment designed to break your cover and force you to reveal your identity. The fact that you endured it until the optimal moment for maximum legal impact shows remarkable professional discipline. Harrison looked between the visitors and Chen, sensing undercurrents to this conversation that extended beyond simple congratulations. Gentlemen, is there something specific about Lieutenant Colonel Chen's performance that requires senior leadership attention? Morrison exchanged glances with his colleagues before responding. Colonel, what happened here today is going to have ripple effects throughout the Marine Corps. Video footage of a major committing assault during a formal inspection, followed by the revelation that his victim was actually a superior officer conducting an authorized investigation. This is going to be studied in every leadership course, every ethics seminar, every discussion about abuse of authority for the next 20 years. He turned to Chen. Lieutenant Colonel, like it or not, you're about to become a case study. The Marine who endured systematic abuse to protect institutional integrity. Your actions here will be held up as an example of how to conduct investigations that require personal sacrifice. Chen's expression remained neutral, but Harrison could see tension building in her shoulders. Being turned into a symbol wasn't necessarily a reward. It was a burden that could follow her for the rest of her career. Sir, I understand the implications. I'm prepared to accept whatever consequences result from completing my assigned mission. Consequences? Morrison shook his head. Lieutenant Colonel, you've just prevented a potential catastrophic security breach while demonstrating courage under fire that most Marines will never be asked to show. The consequences are all positive. Colonel Hendricks opened a briefcase he had been carrying and withdrew a document folder. Lieutenant Colonel Chen, effective immediately, you are being reassigned to Marine Corps Combat Development Command as a senior investigator in the Inspector General's office. Your new duties will include developing training protocols for deep cover operations and serving as lead investigator for cases involving potential security compromises at the field-grade officer level. The promotion was significant, not in rank, which remained at 035, but in responsibility and authority. Chen would be investigating colonels and generals, handling cases with implications for national security. Sir, I'm honored by the assignment. When would you like me to report? You'll finish up here first, Morrison replied. Colonel Harrison needs your testimony for Castellanos' court-martial, and we want you to conduct exit interviews with affected personnel. But within 30 days, you'll be in Quantico working on cases that make this morning's incident look routine. Harrison felt a mixture of respect and concern. Gentlemen, if I may, Lieutenant Colonel Chen has just endured 3 weeks of systematic harassment followed by physical assault. Shouldn't she have some recovery time before taking on additional high-stress assignments? Morrison's expression became more personal, less command authority, and more genuine concern. Colonel, that's exactly why we're here. Lieutenant Colonel Chen, this assignment comes with support resources that weren't available for your current mission, dedicated backup teams, immediate extraction protocols, psychological support throughout operations. Sir, I appreciate the consideration, but this isn't optional, Morrison interrupted gently. What you accomplished here required exceptional sacrifice. We're not asking you to continue operating without proper support structures. Stevens added, Lieutenant Colonel, the Marine Corps has approximately 40 officers qualified for deep cover operations of this type. You're now one of perhaps 6 with proven experience handling systematic abuse while maintaining operational security. That makes you invaluable, but it also makes you too important to risk without proper safeguards. Chen was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of what was being offered. Promotion to the most sensitive investigations in the Marine Corps, but also acknowledgement that her willingness to endure abuse made her essential to operations that other officers couldn't handle. Sir, may I ask about the scope of cases I'd be investigating? Morrison's expression darkened slightly. Lieutenant Colonel, Major Castellanos isn't an isolated incident. Over the past 18 months, we've identified systematic problems with security protocol compliance at 7 major installations. Senior officers requesting unauthorized access to classified materials, patterns of harassment designed to intimidate personnel into violating procedures, abuse of authority that threatens operational security. How systematic? Systematic enough that the Commandant has authorized expansion of the Inspector General's deep cover program. You'd be leading teams of officers conducting investigations similar to what you just completed here. The scope was staggering. Chen had assumed Castellanos was an individual problem requiring individual solution. Instead, he was apparently part of a broader pattern of misconduct that threatened Marine Corps security across multiple installations. "Sir, I accept the assignment." "Good." Morrison stood, followed by his colleagues. "Lieutenant Colonel, finish your work here. Train Colonel Harrison's staff on indicators to watch for. Document everything you learned about conducting this type of investigation. Then report to Quantico and help us fix these problems before they compromise national security." As the senior officers prepared to leave, Morrison turned back to Chen one more time. "Lieutenant Colonel, what you did here today, enduring systematic abuse to protect Marines and institutional integrity, that's the definition of courage under fire. The Marine Corps doesn't have many officers willing to make that kind of sacrifice. We're going to make sure you have the resources and support necessary to continue making a difference." After they left, Harrison and Chen sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Harrison spoke. "Lieutenant Colonel, how do you feel about becoming the Marine Corps specialist in getting abused by senior officers?" Chen's response was immediate and firm. "Sir, if it prevents more Marines from being victimized by people like Major Castellanos, then I'm honored to have the assignment. Even knowing it means more situations like this morning?" "Especially knowing that, sir. What happened to me today was temporary. What Major Castellanos was doing to other Marines would have continued indefinitely if someone hadn't stopped it." Harrison nodded slowly. "Lieutenant Colonel, for what it's worth, I've never seen anything like what you did this morning. Taking that assault without breaking character, using the incident to complete your investigation, maintaining professional composure throughout, that was masterful." "Sir, it was necessary." "Yes, it was. But necessary doesn't make it easy." Chen stood, checking her watch. "Sir, with your permission, I'd like to conduct interviews with the Marines who witnessed this morning's incident. Their testimony will be crucial for the court-martial proceedings." "Granted. Take all the time you need." As Chen prepared to leave Harrison's office, he called out one more time. "Lieutenant Colonel?" "Yes, sir?" "Thank you. For protecting my Marines, for protecting this installation, and for showing us all what courage looks like when someone thinks no one important is watching." Chen came to attention. "Sir, someone important is always watching. Sometimes it just takes a while to reveal themselves." Major Derek Castellanos sat alone in his quarters, staring at the blank wall across from his desk. The space was regulation perfect, uniforms pressed and hanging in precise order, books arranged alphabetically, surfaces clear of any personal items that might suggest comfort or personality. 22 years of Marine Corps discipline had trained him to maintain external order even when internal chaos threatened to consume everything he thought he understood about his life and career. The phone call had come 43 minutes ago. Colonel Harrison's aide, formal and efficient, informing him that he was confined to quarters pending investigation, that military police would be posted outside his door, that he was not to contact anyone or attempt to leave the base. Confined to quarters, like a child being sent to his room for misbehavior. Except this wasn't misbehavior. This was criminal assault committed in front of 200 witnesses, captured on video surveillance, with evidence so overwhelming that even the most skilled defense attorney would struggle to create reasonable doubt. His hands shook as he reached for the bottle of water on his desk. The tremor wasn't from fear, not entirely. It was from the adrenaline crash that followed moments of absolute crisis when the mind finally caught up to what the body had done and began calculating consequences. Lieutenant Colonel Sophia Chen. The name echoed in his mind like artillery fire. 05, Superior Officer, Inspector General's Office. Deep. Cover investigation. For 3 weeks he had been harassing, intimidating, and ultimately assaulting a lieutenant colonel who was documenting his every violation of Marine Corps standards. For 3 weeks he had been digging his own grave while thinking he was demonstrating authority. A knock at the door interrupted his spiraling thoughts. He stood, straightened his uniform out of habit, and called for entry. 2 military police officers entered, both sergeant, both carrying themselves with the professional courtesy that barely concealed underlying tension. Behind them, a man in civilian clothes carrying a briefcase, obviously a lawyer, probably from the base legal office. "Major Castellanos," the senior MP said, consulting a clipboard. "I'm Sergeant Martinez, base military police. This is Sergeant Thompson and Captain Williams from the Staff Judge Advocate's office." Castellanos nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady. Captain Williams stepped forward, opening his briefcase with practiced efficiency. "Major, I'm here to inform you of the charges being filed against you and to ensure you understand your rights under the Uniform Code of Military Justice." "Charges?" Castellanos' voice cracked slightly. "I thought this was still under investigation." "The investigation is complete. Video surveillance captured sufficient evidence to proceed with court-martial proceedings." Williams withdrew a document from his briefcase and began reading with the formal cadence required for legal proceedings. "Major Derek Castellanos, United States Marine Corps, you are hereby charged with violation of Article 128 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, specifically assault upon Lieutenant Colonel Sophia Chen, United States Marine Corps, during the conduct of official duties." The words landed like physical blows. Castellanos felt his knees weaken, steadied himself against the wall. Additional charges include violation of Article 92, failure to obey order or regulation, specifically regarding unauthorized requests for access to classified information. Violation of Article 133, conduct unbecoming an officer and gentleman, specifically regarding systematic harassment of subordinate personnel. And violation of Article 134, general article, specifically regarding behavior prejudicial to good order and discipline. Williams looked up from the document. "Do you understand these charges as I have read them to you?" Castellanos tried to speak, found his throat too dry to produce sound, tried again. Yes, I understand." "Do you wish to make a statement regarding these charges?" The question hung in the air like poison gas. Anything he said could be used against him at court-martial, but remaining silent felt like admitting guilt, accepting responsibility for actions that had seemed justified at the time. She was out of uniform. Her hair was... He stopped, hearing how pathetic the words sounded even to himself. Williams made a note on his clipboard. "Major, I strongly advise you to consult with defense counsel before making any statements regarding the charges. Do you understand this advice?" "Yes." "You have the right to military defense counsel at no cost, or you may hire civilian counsel at your own expense. Do you understand this right?" "Yes." "Initial court-martial proceedings will begin within 72 hours. You will remain confined to quarters until that time. Do you understand these restrictions?" Castellanos nodded, then realized verbal confirmation was required. "Yes, I understand." Williams returned the documents to his briefcase. "Major, someone from the defense counsel's office will contact you within 24 hours to discuss representation options." As the lawyer prepared to leave, Castellanos found himself speaking without conscious decision to do so. "Captain Williams, can I ask you something?" Williams paused. "You may ask, I may not be able to answer." "How bad is this? Realistically, what am I looking at?" Williams considered the question carefully. "Major, I can't provide specific legal advice since I'm not your counsel, but I can tell you that assault charges against superior officers are treated very seriously by court-martial boards, especially when the assault is captured on video and witnessed by large numbers of personnel." "What does that mean in terms of consequences?" "Again, I can't speculate on specific outcomes, but typical sentences for assault on a superior officer range from reduction in rank to dismissal from service, depending on circumstances and the defendant's service record." Dismissal from service, 22 years of dedication, sacrifice, deployment, leadership, all reduced to a dishonorable discharge and criminal conviction. "Captain, The Marine Lieutenant Colonel Chen. She was pretending to be a lance corporal. How was I supposed to know her real rank? Williams's expression became more serious. Major, that question assumes that assaulting a lance corporal would have been appropriate behavior. Is that your position? The question hit like a slap, because there was no good answer. Either he believed assault was acceptable when committed against junior personnel, or he was trying to claim that somehow not knowing Chen's real rank made his behavior less criminal. No, sir, I don't believe assaulting anyone is appropriate. I lost control for a moment. Major, I recommend you discuss these issues with your defense counsel rather than with me. Everything you say can potentially be used in court-martial proceedings. Williams left, followed by the military police. Castellanos was alone again, confined to quarters that suddenly felt like a prison cell. He walked to the window overlooking the main courtyard where the inspection had taken place 6 hours ago. Marines were moving across the space in normal duty patterns, training, administrative tasks, the routine operations that kept MCS Miramar functioning. None of them were looking up at his window. None of them were thinking about Major Derek Castellanos, who had destroyed his career in 8 seconds of uncontrolled ego. By evening, word would spread throughout the base. By tomorrow, everyone would know that a major had committed assault during a formal inspection, that the victim was actually a lieutenant colonel conducting an undercover investigation, that video surveillance had captured everything. His reputation, built over 2 decades of service, would be reduced to a cautionary tale about the consequences of abusing authority. The irony was crushing. For 3 weeks, he had been trying to demonstrate his importance, his authority, his right to demand compliance from subordinates. Instead, he had been systematically documenting his own unfitness for command, creating evidence that would destroy everything he had worked to achieve. Lieutenant Colonel Chen hadn't defeated him. He had defeated himself. A second knock at the door announced the arrival of dinner, a tray delivered by military police, eaten under supervision, the kind of treatment reserved for personnel who could no longer be trusted with basic privileges. As he picked at food that tasted like cardboard, Castellanos tried to understand how he had reached this point. When had requesting files become harassment? When had demonstrating authority become abuse? When had military leadership become criminal assault? But the questions had no comfortable answers. The truth was simpler and more damning than he wanted to admit. He had become exactly the kind of officer he had once despised, someone who used rank as a weapon, who confused authority with power, who treated subordinates as obstacles rather than Marines deserving respect. Somewhere along the way, 22 years of service had corrupted him into believing that his position made him untouchable, that junior personnel existed for his convenience, that regulations were suggestions rather than requirements, and Lieutenant Colonel Sophia Chen had documented every step of that corruption with the precision of someone trained to build prosecutions that could survive any legal challenge. At 2100 hours, the base settled into evening routine. From his window, Castellanos could see Marines finishing their duties, securing workspaces, preparing for liberty or rest. Normal people living normal military lives, unaware that their morning inspection had concluded with the destruction of a field-grade officer's career. He thought about calling his wife, explaining what had happened, preparing her for the media attention and legal proceedings that would follow. But what could he say? That he had grabbed another Marine's hair during an inspection because he was frustrated with her attitude? That 3 weeks of harassment and intimidation had culminated in assault because he couldn't control his temper? The 22 years of service were ending in disgrace because he had forgotten the most basic principle of military leadership, treating subordinates with dignity and respect. The phone remained untouched on his desk. At midnight, unable to sleep despite exhaustion, Castellanos sat down and began writing. Not a legal defense. His lawyer would handle that. Not an explanation. There was no explanation that could justify what he had done. Instead, he wrote a letter of apology to Lieutenant Colonel Chen. The words came slowly, each sentence an admission of failure, each paragraph a recognition of damage that could never be fully repaired. Lieutenant Colonel Chen, there is no excuse for what I did to you during this morning's inspection. Grabbing your hair was assault, pure and simple. It was criminal behavior that violated everything the Marine Corps stands for. I want you to know that my actions were not a reflection of the values this institution teaches, but rather a reflection of my personal failure to live up to those values. For 3 weeks, I treated you with disrespect, harassment, and intimidation. I used my perceived authority to make your duty environment hostile and degrading. I demanded compliance with inappropriate requests and threatened consequences when you rightfully refused. I did these things because I had lost sight of what leadership actually means. I confused rank with authority, position with power, command with control. You demonstrated more courage and professionalism in 3 weeks than I showed in 22 years of service. You endured systematic abuse while maintaining your mission focus, documented criminal behavior while controlling your personal response, and used my assault as evidence rather than excuse for retaliation. I will accept whatever consequences result from court-martial proceedings. I will not attempt to minimize my actions or blame circumstances beyond my control. What I did was wrong. What you endured was unconscionable. What the Marine Corps will do to prevent future incidents like this is necessary. I am sorry for the pain I caused you personally and the damage I caused to institutional trust and good order and discipline. Major Derek Castellanos, United States Marine Corps. He sealed the letter in an envelope, addressed it to Lieutenant Colonel Chen, care of the Inspector General's office, and placed it on his desk, where military police would find it during their next security check. Whether she chose to read it or not was her decision. Whether it helped or hurt his legal position was irrelevant. It was simply the right thing to do, perhaps the first genuinely right thing he had done in months. Outside his window, MCS Miramar continued its eternal rhythm. Guard shifts changing, security patrols walking their routes, aircraft prepared for dawn training missions. The machinery of military readiness grinding forward without pause or reflection. Major Derek Castellanos would not be part of that machinery much longer, but Lieutenant Colonel Sophia Chen would continue her work. Investigating cases, protecting Marines, ensuring that people like him could not abuse their authority without consequence. That knowledge provided no comfort, but it did provide something more important, the certainty that justice would be served and future victims would be protected. 8 seconds of uncontrolled ego had destroyed his career, but those same 8 seconds had also revealed the strength of the institution he had failed to serve properly. The Marine Corps would survive his disgrace, would learn from his failures, would become stronger because of the courage shown by the woman he had assaulted. That was enough. It had to be enough, because it was all he had left to give. 6 weeks later, Lieutenant Colonel Sophia Chen stood before a packed courtroom at Marine Corps Base Quantico, her dress blue uniform bearing the ribbons that reflected a career of exceptional service under extraordinary circumstances. The court-martial proceedings for United States Major Derek Castellanos had drawn attention from throughout the Marine Corps, not just for the serious nature of the charges, but for the broader implications about accountability and institutional integrity. The military judge, Colonel Rebecca Torres, had served for 15 years in various legal positions before accepting appointment to the bench. Her reputation for fairness was matched only by her intolerance for misconduct that threatened good order and discipline. "Lieutenant Colonel Chen," she said from the bench, "you may proceed with your testimony." Chen stood at the witness stand, her bearing reflecting the confidence that came from months of preparation and absolute certainty in the strength of her evidence. "Your Honor, my testimony concerns the systematic misconduct observed during a 3-week investigation period at Marine Corps Air Station Miramar, culminating in the assault that occurred during the quarterly personnel inspection on March 15th. The defense attorney, Captain Morrison, had already exhausted most of his challenges to the evidence. Video surveillance of the assault was unambiguous. Witness testimony from 200 Marines was consistent and damning. The documentation of harassment patterns was comprehensive and methodical. But he had one final strategy, attempting to portray Chen's investigation as entrapment, suggesting that she had somehow provoked Castellanos into criminal behavior. "Lieutenant Colonel Chen," Morrison began during cross-examination, Isn't it true that you deliberately concealed your identity to create situations where Major Castellanos would behave inappropriately? Chen's response was immediate and firm. Counselor, I concealed my identity to observe and document behavior that was already occurring. Major Castellanos' pattern of harassment toward female personnel was established months before my investigation began. But you did nothing to stop that harassment while you observed it. I documented everything I witnessed and intervened when criminal assault occurred. The investigation required gathering sufficient evidence to ensure successful prosecution and institutional changes that would prevent future incidents. Morrison tried a different approach. Lieutenant Colonel, doesn't your willingness to endure systematic harassment suggest that you were more interested in building a case than protecting Marines who were being victimized? The question was designed to make Chen appear callous, willing to allow abuse to continue for the sake of her investigation. But it revealed Morrison's fundamental misunderstanding of what had actually occurred. Counselor, 14 Marines were being harassed by Major Castellanos before my investigation began. Those same 14 Marines received protection through the removal of their harasser and implementation of new oversight procedures. Additional Marines who might have been victimized in the future were protected by documenting patterns that enabled institutional changes. But you could have stopped the harassment immediately by revealing your identity and allowed Major Castellanos to modify his behavior, destroy evidence, and continue operating with more sophisticated concealment. The investigation was designed to create lasting protection, not temporary intervention. The prosecutor, Major Sarah Williams, rose for redirect examination. Lieutenant Colonel Chen, in your professional assessment, what would have been the long-term consequences if Major Castellanos had not been stopped through this investigation? Chen turned toward the court-martial board, 7 officers ranging from major to colonel, all combat veterans with extensive experience in command positions. Based on his escalating pattern of behavior, I assess that Major Castellanos would have achieved unauthorized access to classified materials within 6 to 8 weeks. The potential for catastrophic security breach was significant and growing. Can you elaborate on the security implications? Major Castellanos' requests for unauthorized access included personnel files containing security clearance information, operational assignments, and personal vulnerabilities, medical records revealing psychological profiles and physical limitations, disciplinary records showing Marines vulnerable to compromise through financial pressure or personal embarrassment. She paused, letting the board consider the scope of what Castellanos had attempted to access. This information, in the hands of hostile intelligence services, could have been used to identify and target key personnel for recruitment, coercion, or elimination. The board members exchanged glances. These were officers who understood operational security, who knew that protecting classified information was fundamental to national defense. Lieutenant Colonel, what changes have been implemented at MKS Miramar as a result of your investigation? New oversight procedures for personnel with access to classified materials, including regular psychological evaluations and financial monitoring. Independent reporting channels for security concerns that bypass normal chain of command. Enhanced training for junior personnel on recognizing and reporting inappropriate pressure from senior officers, and establishment of rapid response protocols for situations where abuse of authority threatens operational security. The changes were comprehensive, designed to prevent future incidents while empowering Marines to report misconduct without fear of retaliation. Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel. No further questions. During closing arguments, Major Williams addressed the court-martial board with the kind of prosecutorial precision that left no room for doubt. Gentlemen, the evidence in this case is overwhelming. Video surveillance shows Major Castellanos committing assault on a superior officer. 200 witnesses observed the incident. Audio recordings document his pattern of harassment and intimidation. She gestured toward the evidence table where tablets and documents were arranged in perfect order. But this case is about more than individual misconduct. It's about the fundamental principle that authority comes with responsibility. that leadership requires respect for subordinates, that the Marine Corps maintains its standards through accountability at every level. She turned to face Castellanos, who sat at the defense table looking like a man who had aged years in 6 weeks. Major Castellanos chose to use his rank as a weapon rather than a tool for leadership. He chose intimidation over inspiration, harassment over mentorship, assault over respect. Those choices have consequences. Captain Morrison's closing argument attempted to portray his client as a dedicated Marine who had made a single mistake under stressful circumstances. But the evidence of systematic misconduct made that narrative impossible to sustain. After 2 hours of deliberation, the court-martial board returned with their verdict. Major Derek Castellanos, this court finds you guilty of all charges and specifications. The sentence was delivered 30 minutes later. Dismissal from the Marine Corps, confinement for 18 months, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, and reduction to the lowest enlisted grade. 22 years of service ending in total disgrace. As military police led Castellanos from the courtroom, he paused near the witness stand where Chen remained seated. He had requested permission to address her directly, a request that had been denied by his own attorney but granted by the court as part of his victim impact statement. "Lieutenant Colonel," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute defeat, "I want you to know that what I did was unforgivable. You showed more courage and integrity in 3 weeks than I demonstrated in my entire career." Chen stood and faced him directly. When she spoke, her tone carried no anger, no satisfaction, no emotion beyond professional respect for the conclusion of a successful investigation. "Major Castellanos, the Marine Corps is stronger because of accountability. Your actions helped us identify weaknesses that needed to be addressed. In that sense, even your failures served the institution." It was perhaps the most devastating statement she could have made, acknowledging that his disgrace had value only as a lesson for others, that his career had ended by contributing to the very improvements designed to prevent future officers from following his path. Castellanos nodded once, then allowed himself to be led away to begin serving his sentence. After the courtroom cleared, Chen found herself approached by Brigadier General Morrison, who had been observing the proceedings from the gallery. "Lieutenant Colonel, that was masterful testimony. You presented complex evidence clearly and maintained professional composure despite reliving traumatic experiences." "Thank you, sir. The evidence spoke for itself." "How do you feel about the verdict?" Chen considered the question carefully. "Sir, I feel satisfied that justice was served and that changes have been implemented to prevent similar incidents. The investigation accomplished its intended objectives." Morrison studied her face, looking for some sign of personal satisfaction or vindictive pleasure. He found neither. Just the professional satisfaction of someone who had completed a difficult mission successfully. "Lieutenant Colonel, your new assignment at Combat Development Command begins Monday. Are you ready for cases that make this morning look routine?" "Yes, sir. I'm ready." But as Chen prepared to leave Quantico and begin investigating corruption at even higher levels of command, she reflected on the broader implications of what had been accomplished. Major Derek Castellanos had been more than just a problem officer. He had been symptomatic of institutional weaknesses that allowed harassment, intimidation, and security violations to continue unchecked. His removal was important, but the changes implemented at MCS Miramar were more significant. New oversight procedures, independent reporting channels, enhanced training, rapid response protocols, systemic improvements that would protect Marines for years to come. That evening, Chen sat in her temporary quarters at Quantico, reviewing files for her first case at Combat Development Command. A colonel suspected of trading classified information for personal favors. A systematic pattern of misconduct that threatened operational security at multiple installations. Another deep cover investigation. Another opportunity to endure abuse while building cases that would protect institutional integrity. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Gunnery Sergeant Martinez at MCS Miramar. "Ma'am, wanted you to know that morale in the admin section has never been better. The Marines you protected are doing exceptional work. Thank you for having our backs." The message was simple, but it captured the real victory of the investigation. Not the conviction of one corrupt officer, but the protection of Marines who could now perform their duties without fear of harassment or retaliation. Chen closed the case file and prepared for sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new investigations, new opportunities to ensure that people like Major Castellanos could not abuse their authority without consequence. But tonight, she could rest knowing that 14 Marines at MKS Miramar were safer because she had been willing to endure 3 weeks of systematic abuse followed by physical assault. Justice wasn't always swift, but when it arrived, it was absolute. And sometimes the greatest victories were measured not in personal vindication, but in the protection of those who served with quiet dignity, asking only for the respect that every Marine deserved. The Marine Corps was stronger because of accountability, safer because of courage, better because someone had been willing to take hits so that others didn't have to. 8 seconds had changed everything. 8 seconds when absolute power became absolute humiliation. 8 seconds when hidden strength revealed itself at exactly the right moment. 8 seconds when justice arrived with overwhelming force. The legend of Lieutenant Colonel Sophia Chen would be told for decades, not as a story of revenge, but as an example of how integrity and courage could overcome any abuse of authority. But more importantly, the systems put in place because of her sacrifice would protect Marines she would never meet, prevent abuses she would never witness, ensure that future generations could serve with dignity and respect. That was enough. More than enough. That was everything. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These true tales keep the courage alive for generations to come. And in the comments, tell us where you're watching from and who's the quiet leader you'll never forget.